Good afternoon, and welcome to today's web seminar on supporting anaerobic digestion in communities, requests for applications. This webinar is sponsored by the EPA's Sustainable Materials Management Web Academy. My name is Cristina Torres, and I'm with the U.S. EPA Sustainable Materials Management Program in Washington, D.C. I will be managing the technical aspects of today's webinar. While we wait for the others to log on, I'd just like to cover a few housekeeping items to make sure that you get the most out of today's webinar. So by now, you should have logged into the GoToWebinar application. You should have it running and should see the welcome presentation on your screen. If you're having technical difficulties using GoToWebinar, the first thing you should do is wait a few moments and the issue will generally resolve itself. If it doesn't, you can go to www.gotowebinar.com and click on the FAQs in the blue navigation bar on the left side of the page. The presentation slides will be advanced by our presenter, Chris Carasello. You can also find a copy of the slides are in your handout box on your screen. We encourage you to ask questions. Please use the GoToWebinar control panel and type your question in the area that says questions. Then click send to submit your questions to our moderator. You can type questions throughout the presentation and we'll answer questions at the end of the presentation. After today's webinar, there will be a short evaluation. We really encourage you to take a moment to fill it out. Your feedback is absolutely vital to helping us provide the highest quality speakers and information to meet your needs. We take your feedback very seriously. Maya Sjogren is on the call with us today. She is also with EPA's Sustainable Materials Management Program in Washington, D.C., and she'll be handling the questions for Chris to respond. I really want to thank all of you for joining this edition of the Sustainable Materials Management Web Academy. We're happy to have you participating. The 60-minute webinar is hosted by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the purpose is to provide training and a networking opportunity to state, local, and tribal governments, non-governmental organizations, and other stakeholders who are interested in sustainable materials management. It is a real pleasure for me to welcome to EPA's Web Academy, Chris Carasello. Chris is a member of the Sustainable Materials Management Program in Washington, D.C., working in the built environment and the sustainable management of food areas. He is a project manager for the anaerobic digestion request for applications. You can find Chris's full biography on the SMM Web Academy website where you registered for this webinar. On the screen now is a disclaimer for you to read. I wanted to remind you that we will take all questions after the formal presentation. Please feel free to type your questions throughout the webinar. We will answer as many of the questions that we have time for. If we have a lot of questions, we won't have time to respond to them all, but please know that we are getting your questions. And we'll do our best to respond to as many as possible. I would like to now turn the presentation over to our speaker for this webinar, Chris Carasello. Chris, take it away.
Thank you so much, Christina. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on supporting anaerobic digestion in communities, request for applications, brought to you by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery. We talked a little bit before about some housekeeping items. Just a friendly reminder, this webinar is being recorded and all attendee lines have been muted. You will be in listen-only mode. However, at the end, we will have time for questions. So please enter your questions at any time during the webinar in the questions box, and those will be sent to us. When submitting a question, please identify yourself by your name and organization and note the slide number that you are addressing to help us answer. If you have any technical difficulties, please use the question tab. Like Krista said, sometimes those issues can be resolved by waiting a few seconds. If it doesn't work, please use that questions tab. Please note that the slide presentation that you're viewing here is available for you to download. To find that, please go to the Handout tab. You can download it onto your computer. We will make every effort to have the slides and presentation transcript, along with questions and answers, frequent questions from this webinar and from questions we've received, posted to our grant page on the EPA website as soon as we can. At the end of this webinar, you will be asked to evaluate the presentation materials and prompted to answer some very short evaluation questions. We hope you'll participate in that evaluation. It helps us to improve our presentation materials going forward. Now, let's dive in and begin. We have a pretty full agenda today. We're going to start with describing the goals of the webinar, then dive into the Sustainable Materials Management Program. We will then discuss the funding opportunity, followed by what the applications will be evaluated for. We will conclude the presentation with questions and answers. The goals of the webinar are to 1, provide an overview of the Sustainable Materials Management request for applications for potential applicants and interested stakeholders, and 2, to clarify the information and answer questions about the application and review process to help potential applicants submit high-quality applications for funding consideration. As you may know, the RFA was posted on May 15th, so it's been out for a few weeks now, and hopefully many of you have had a chance to either read it or take a look at some of it. My core objective here is to have you come away from this webinar feeling like you have a good starting point to structuralize your grant projects and to begin drafting your applications if you haven't done so already. We're not going to be able to answer questions that are outside the scope of the RFA during this presentation. Now, let's begin with a brief overview of the Sustainable Materials Management Program. Sustainable materials management refers to how we manage material resources as they flow through the economy, from extraction or harvest of materials and food, design and production, packaging and distribution, use and maintenance, reuse of materials, recovery and recycling, and if necessary, disposal. From a life cycle perspective, end-of-life strategies only address one life cycle stage of the material of a product. By considering system-wide impacts, SMM casts a far broader net than traditional waste and chemicals management approaches and represents a change in how we think about environmental impacts. There's important work to be done at the end of life, but if we are to deal with the complex human health and environmental issues, address material resource issues, and yes, reduce and eliminate waste in the first place, then it is essential we transition to SMM. SMM encourages life cycle-based decision-making and collaborative and integrative approaches to problem solving. Through SMM, we recognize that we must use systems-based approaches to cast a far broader net than approaches based on traditional end-of-life waste management and end-of-life pollution management. This represents a radical change in how we think about environmental impacts and economics. And these principles need to be applied at all levels, from the community to the global economy. On September 16th, 2015, in alignment with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the United States Department of Agriculture, EPA announced the first ever domestic goal to reduce food loss and waste by half by the year 2030. By taking action on the US 2030 Food Loss and Waste Reduction Goal, the United States can help feed the hungry, save money for families and businesses, and protect the environment. Led by USDA and EPA, the federal government is seeking to work with communities, organizations, and businesses, along with our partners in state, tribal, and local government to reduce food loss and waste by 50% over the next 10 years. In addition, in fiscal years 19 and 20, Congress provided EPA with funds to help public entities demonstrate community anaerobic digestion applications to municipal solid waste streams and farm needs, such as capturing excess phosphorus. So what exactly is this anaerobic digestion that Congress gave us funds to support? Anaerobic digestion is the natural process in which microorganisms break down organic materials. In this instance, organic means coming from or made of plants or animals. Anaerobic digestion happens in closed spaces where there is no oxygen. This is different than composting, which is aerobic with oxygen. The graphic to the right shows the anaerobic digestion process. I promise this is the most chemistry you'll see in this webinar. We start with the hydrolysis process, where large organic compounds, such as carbohydrates, proteins, fats, are broken down into sugars, amino acids, and fatty acids. Then, in the acetogenesis step, those sugars, fatty acids, and amino acids become long-chain fatty acids and intermediates. That brings us to the acetogenesis phase, which is an immediate precursor for the majority of the methane produced. In acetogenesis, the long-chain fatty acids and intermediates become hydrogen gas, acetic acid, and CO2. And the final metabolic phase is methanogenesis, which produces methane gas from the acetate, hydrogen gas, and CO2. In this process, the carbon in the organic molecules is fully reduced to methane, the biogas, and a solid and liquid digestate are generated. Some examples of materials generally considered organic that can be processed in a digester are animal manure, food scraps, fats, oils, and greases, industrial organic residuals, and sewage sludge, biosolids. Communities and businesses across the country use biogas to power engines, produce mechanical power, heat, and electricity, fuel boilers and furnaces, heating digesters and other spaces, run alternative fuel vehicles, and supply homes and businesses through the natural gas pipeline. Digestate can be made into products like bedding for livestock, flower pots, soil amendments, and fertilizers. EPA's AgStar program recently released an anaerobic digester project development handbook. It provides a comprehensive compilation of the latest knowledge in the industry on best practices for anaerobic digestion in the biogas system. You may wish to consider reviewing it if you are considering anaerobic digestion projects in your community. I'll walk you through the 10 keys to successful AD projects, which are pulled from the handbook. We advise you to consider these keys to success when applying for the RFA. You may determine that your application may address one or several of these considerations, depending on what phase you're in. Also, EPA broadcast a webinar on the handbook on May 27th. You may wish to listen to the recording. It will be available in the next few weeks on the AgStar website, which is noted at the end of this presentation. Key 1 is to plan for success by identifying and defining clear project goals. Key 2 is recruit and secure an experienced and qualified project team. Key 3, develop a sustainable business model to meet financial goals. Key 4, secure a suitable feedstock supply and evaluate its characteristics. Key 5, use the most appropriate technology to match the type and amount of feedstock. Key 6, analyze options for biogas and digestate use. Key 7, develop offtake agreements that ensure project revenue. Key 8, evaluate added benefits that could be reasons for implementing a project. Key 9, conduct community outreach and education to obtain project buy-in and approval. And Key 10, plan to continually optimize operations and maintenance to ensure the biological processes and mechanical equipment are working properly. Now, to make our way over to the funding opportunity. Before we can delve into the current funding opportunity, we want to take a few minutes to highlight the previous funding opportunity awardees who were selected to receive funding for projects expanding AD capacity in 2019. In fiscal year 18, Congress encouraged EPA to use existing funds to support community applications for anaerobic digestion. And $100,000 was made available for that simplified competition grant process. The following 3 slides are going to reflect those winners and their projects. The City of Madison, Wisconsin's project was a feasibility study for a food waste digester. They were awarded $39,000 for their project to expand upon previous research performed by the City of Madison to include a region-wide model that takes advantage of the county's new renewable natural gas offloading station. The expanded study includes a 10 and 20-year financial analysis and a report on the community engagement process. The photo on the right is a compressor at Dane County's new renewable natural gas offloading station. Compressors are used to pump methane derived from decaying organic material into the pipeline that serves the natural gas fuel station. In the background of the slide, we have the offloading station in Madison. Aerial view. The Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation's project was to develop infrastructure to enable the anaerobic digestion of food and beverage processed waste through its cohort program, and utilize that partnership for this demonstration. Their goal is to solve multiple persistent challenges: lack of waste stream separation and storage capacity, dwindling landfill capacity, overtaxed wastewater systems, underutilized AD, the need to transition to sustainable energy sources, and insufficient geographic concentration of businesses desiring hauling services to support viable routes. Washington State University's RNG Outreach and Education Program in the Pacific Northwest was for $27,000 to promote the expansion of renewable natural gas through AD via workshops to find solutions to barriers affecting AD and RNG development. These workshops will promote AD projects by wastewater treatment plants, food processing companies, MSW agencies, and agriculture producers. The workshops will include market knowledge and innovative approaches to sharing costs and developing AD infrastructure. Now, we are going to transition to the current funding opportunity. The scope of work for this RFA are projects to increase the use of anaerobic digestion for the management of food waste. Applications must achieve one or more of the following objectives: support state, tribal, and/or local government programs that seek to use AD to increase their organic waste diversion rates. Demonstrate solutions and/or applications for increasing AD utilization that can be replicated by other communities, governments, or other entities, or establish new or expand existing partnerships, such as public-private partnerships, that result in the development of AD capacity. Like I mentioned before, in fiscal years 19 and 20, Congress provided EPA with funds to help public entities demonstrate community AD applications to municipal solid waste streams and farm needs, such as capturing excess phosphorus. Based on our statutory authority, funding will be given to projects that focus on learning, such as pilots or demonstrations. Since many applications of AD are not standardized, and because effective AD is a science in itself, we suspect many applications will not have difficulty in reflecting the connection their project has to experiments, learning, research, education, or pilots related to solid waste. Consider that if your organization is asking for $300,000 for AD equipment, you need to be clear how it is tied to a learning or a demonstration project. Please keep this in mind when writing up your applications and include in your project a component for this piece under the Solid Waste Disposal Act. So, who is eligible? Well, any of the 50 states, DC, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and Northern Marianas Islands, local, tribal, interstate, and intrastate government agencies and instrumentalities, nonprofits, nonprofit educational institutions, and nonprofit hospitals are all eligible to apply. Not eligible includes nonprofit organizations that lobby, individuals, and for-profit organizations. For the type of work that can be used for projects, might include feasibility studies, technology and process evaluations, technical assistance, outreach, and/or training to model or accelerate solutions, outreach workshops, improvements to the collection or quality of food waste feedstocks, evaluations or developing solutions to barriers that prevent the use of AD, expanding processing capacity with equipment, training, improved efficiency, or developing or improving feedstock collection networks. See page 3 of the RFA for a list of additional projects that may be considered. Consistent with the Solid Waste Disposal Act, 8001, research, investigations, experiments, training, demonstration projects, surveys, public education programs, and studies related to solid waste management are eligible under this RFA. Equipment is an eligible cost for this RFA as long as it is part of a demonstration project, or if there is a clear connection to how the project will increase learning and understanding of anaerobic digestion. For the grant funding, the total estimated funding for all of the applications shall not exceed $3 million. EPA anticipates awarding 10 to 40 cooperative agreements ranging from $50,000 to $300,000. EPA reserves the right to reject all applications and make no rewards. The estimated start date for projects is October 1st, 2020, and all project activities must be completed within the negotiated project performance period of 2 years. So now here's very important parts, evaluating the applications. The first step in evaluating applications is the threshold evaluation. Applications must meet the following threshold criteria when they submit their application. Applications that fail to meet any one of the threshold criteria will not be considered further. Therefore, it's really important to pass this check. First eligibility criteria is that applications must address the mandatory program objectives and elements described in Section 1B, Scope of Work, of this announcement. The second is that federal funds requested must not exceed $300,000. This excludes any leveraging. Applications requesting funding in excess of this value will not be considered. And the third is that applications must substantially comply with application submission instructions and requirements set forth in Section 4B, grants.gov. Application submission instructions of this announcement, or else they will be rejected. Also, applications with pages in excess of the page limitation will not be reviewed. For this RFA, that's 11 pages. Here is a list of the materials you will need to submit for the application. Standard Form 424, Application for Federal Assistance. Application Form 424A, Budget Information for Non-Construction Programs. Narrative Proposal in the template form in Appendix A. Budget Table and Narrative, see the example in Appendix B. EPA Key Contacts Form 5700-54 and EPA Form 4700-4 Pre-Award Compliance Review Report. Now we're moving on to the grant evaluation. Once it passes the threshold review, it will go on to be evaluated by the EPA. Reviewers will look for compliance with threshold eligibility criteria and submission requirements, all applicable application materials, the scope of work. Projects must be aligned with SNM and national emphasis areas, clear responsiveness to the evaluation criteria, and please, please, please use the template provided when responding in Appendix A. Applications must contain a narrative proposal and budget table and narrative. The narrative proposal is a maximum of 11 pages in length, explicitly describes the application's proposed project, and specifically addresses each of the evaluation criteria disclosed in Section 5A, Evaluation Criteria, and the threshold eligibility criteria in Section 3C. Factual information about your proposed project must be provided. Do not include discussions of broad principles that are not specific to the proposed work or project covered by your application. Vague descriptions, redundancy, and failure to address each of the evaluation criteria will result in a lower ranking. The narrative proposal in Section 5 must be submitted in the format detailed in Appendix A, Template for Narrative Proposal. Failure to follow the required format may result in a reduction of up to 5 points under the Project Summary and Approach Evaluation Criterion. Getting into the evaluation criteria, eligible entities whose applications meet the eligibility information in Section 3 will be reviewed according to these evaluation criteria set forth in the following slides. Each application will be rated under a point system with a total of 100 points possible. Applications must directly and explicitly address these criteria in the Template for Narrative Proposal, Appendix A. Now, let's take a look at the evaluation criteria. Criterion 1, Project Summary and Approach. Under this criterion, the agency will evaluate A, the extent and quality to which the narrative proposal includes a well-conceived strategy for addressing the requirements in Section 1, Part B, Scope of Work, Section 1, Part C, the EPA Strategic Plan linkage, And Section 1, Part D, Measuring Environmental Results, Anticipated Outcomes and Outputs. This awards 15 points. It also looks at the extent and quality to which the narrative proposal sets forth a clear and reasonable time schedule and associated project tasks for achieving the project goals and objectives by project end. That is 10 points. Criterion 1 has a total of 15 points, or sorry, of 25 points. Criterion 1 has a total of 25 points. Criterion 2 is environmental results and performance measurement, anticipated outcomes and outputs. Under this criterion, applications will be evaluated based on the extent to which the narrative proposal realistically describes how the project will lead to measurable environmental results. The proposal will be evaluated based on the extent and quality to which the application clearly describes how the applicant will measure success in meeting their project's objectives, clearly specifies anticipated environmental outcomes and outputs as described in Section 1D, Measuring Environmental Results, Anticipated Outcomes and Outputs. Outcomes and outputs can be quantitative or qualitative and must measure environmental improvement or should be directly linked to environmental improvement. Include quantitative targets as appropriate. This will give you 10 points. The term output means an environmental activity, effort, and/or associated work product related to an environmental goal and objective that will be produced or provided over a specified period of time or by a specified date. Outputs may be quantitative or qualitative, but must be measurable during the assistance agreement funding period. For example, pounds of food scraps and/or food residuals diverted from landfill and directed to AD. Number of individuals, state and local governments, or businesses served by education, outreach, training, technical assistance, and/or tools related to AD. Number of recommendations made to businesses and facilities, or types of skills and abilities achieved by training participants. Contrast that with outcomes. The term outcome means the result, effect, or consequence that will occur from carrying out an environmental program or activity that is related to an environmental or programmatic goal or objective. Outcomes may be qualitative and environmental, behavioral, health-related, or programmatic in nature. Applications must include a description of anticipated project outcomes resulting from the project outputs, even if the outcome to be achieved is beyond the assistance agreement funding period. Include the quantitative target associated with the outcome as appropriate. Some examples of outcomes are increased resources and technical assistance through education, outreach, and training to individuals and/or businesses on AD, increased public and/or businesses' understanding of AD opportunities and benefits, improved quality of feedstock for existing AD funding facility capacity, or measurable improvements to the environment and/or ecosystem conditions related to AD operations for air, water, and waste. You can find more examples of outcomes and outputs in the RFA. The second part of this criterion describes the plan for achieving project results, including the outcomes and outputs identified in Section 1. That'll give you 5 points. And the third part describes how the project is transferable to other communities. That is 5 points. Criterion 2 has a total of 20 points. Criterion 3, programmatic capability, and past performance. Under this criterion, applicants will be evaluated based on their ability to successfully complete and manage the proposed project, taking into account past performance in successfully completing and managing projects, including but not limited to federal and non-federal assistance agreements described in Section 4, Part D, Number 1B, Roman numeral 3, on page 14 of this announcement. And that gives you 5 points. Also, a history of meeting the reporting requirements under the assistance agreements described in Section 4 of this announcement. Identify whether your organization submitted acceptable final technical reports under those agreements and the extent to which the applicant adequately and timely reported on their progress towards achieving the expected outputs and outcomes under those agreements. And if such progress was not being made, whether the applicant adequately reported why not. That gives you 5 points. And finally, organizational experience and plan for timely and successfully achieving the objectives of the proposed project. This could include staff expertise and qualifications, staff knowledge and resources, or the ability to obtain them to successfully achieve the goals of the proposed project. 5 points. Criterion 3 has a total of 15 points. Criterion 4, project sustainability. Under this criterion, applicants will be evaluated based on the extent and quality to which the applicant can demonstrate its ability to promote and continue efforts to support AD after EPA funding for this project has ended. That's 5 points. And the application describes the extent to which the project supports a state or local mandate, policy, or community priority to remove food waste and organic materials from the municipal waste stream. 10 points. The Part B bullet is really important as it goes back to our congressional language, prioritizing communities and states that have statutes mandating the removal of food waste and similar organic material from their municipal waste streams. Criterion 4 has a total of 15 points. Criterion 5 covers effective partnerships. Under this criterion, the agency will evaluate the application based on how well the applicant addresses the following. Describes the partnerships and/or coalition currently in place to support the proposed project and why it is sufficient to complete the proposed project. If the partnership will be expanded, describe the additional members that will be engaged and/or recruited. Also, describes the role of each partner on the project and their experience working with the target audience and/or the sectors addressed. Applicants that do not plan on collaborating with other groups in project performance will be evaluated based on the extent to which they demonstrate how they will be able to effectively perform and complete the project without such collaboration. Criterion 5 has a total of 10 points. Criterion 6 is the budget and expenditure of awarded grant funds. Under this criterion, the agency will evaluate the proposed project budget and narrative to determine the extent and quality to which costs are reasonable to accomplish the proposed goals, objectives, and measurable environmental outcomes. The proposed budget provides a detailed breakout of the approximate funding used for each major activity. The applicant conveys their approach, procedures, and controls for ensuring that awarded grant funds will be expended in a timely and efficient manner. An applicant's budget narrative must account for both federal funds and any non-federal funds, for example, any leveraging available. Applicants must precisely describe in their budget narratives how they will account for any voluntary leveraging and what role EPA funding will play on the overall project. Criterion 6 has a total of 10 points. And finally, criterion 7, voluntary leveraging. Under this criterion, applicants will be evaluated based on the extent they demonstrate how they will coordinate the use of EPA funding with other federal and/or non-federal sources of funds and resources to leverage additional resources beyond the grant funds awarded to carry out the proposed projects, and/or that EPA funding will complement activities relevant to the proposed projects carried out by the applicant with other sources of funds or resources. Applicants will also be evaluated based on the type and amount of leveraging proposed, how the applicant will obtain the leveraged resources, the likelihood of the leveraging will materialize during grant performance, the strength of the leveraging commitment, and the role the leveraging resources will play to support the proposed project activities. Criterion 7 has a total of 5 points. Here are some tips for preparing your applications. Start early. The fact that you're attending this webinar, asking questions, and engaged is a good sign. Keep up that work until your application is submitted. Line up partners. We stress the importance of partnerships and leveraging in the evaluation criteria, so please do that. The power of partnerships can help a project be successful. Double check your calculations when working on a budget, timeline, or anything that needs calculations, maybe those outcomes or outputs, to ensure accuracy. Provide detailed descriptions of your proposed work. We have dedicated reviewers for the applications, but I would err on the side of being overly descriptive in your details. Have some people read it over to make sure the language is clear and detailed. And please, do stay within the 11-page limit, so be clear and efficient with your words. Clearly demonstrate the threshold and evaluation criteria. This is very important to ensure your application is reviewed and that you get points so that it can be awarded. And finally, please use the template provided. This not only makes it easier for you to write the application, but also for the reviewers to make your information and give you the points. Also, so you don't get 5 points taken away for not doing it, please use the template. Here are some online resources that might be useful. A link to the EPA strategic plan. The initial link on page 4 of the RFA was incorrect. It had an extra HTML at the end of the link, which will display an error message. The web page listed here is correct and can be used to access the EPA strategic plan. The SMM webpage to learn more about sustainable materials management. The Sustainable Management of Food webpage. EPA's Anaerobic Digestion webpage will include a link to the recently recorded AD Project Development Handbook webinar and currently includes the actual webinar, or actual handbook, the Office of Grants and Debarments, Recipient Training Requirements and Opportunities webpage, and a link to EPA's AgStar program. Thank you so much for your attention as we went over the slides today on the RFA. Here's my contact information, so you have it. Now we'll open it up to questions we've received via GoToWebinar. Give us a minute or two to go through those that have come in. And if you want to take some time now to download the slides, that would be great too. You can also ask questions here using GoToWebinar.
While Maya and Chris are going through the questions, they'll begin answering them very shortly. I wanted to remind you, as Chris did, that there are 2 handouts in the handout section of your doc on the side of the GoToWebinar. You may want to download those now. Maya and Chris, whenever you're ready, we can get started.
Thanks, Christina. So we received some similar questions about who is eligible for these grants, and I'll go ahead and repeat that question. I think Chris answered it, but we'll go ahead and address this here. So Chris, can you speak to who is eligible? For example, can a state or local government apply to this grant, and are public-private partnerships eligible to participate in this RFA?
Yes, thank you, Maya. I just had to unmute myself. Yes, you'll find in section 3 the eligibility information in the RFA. That starts on page 6. Eligible entities include applications from states, including DC, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and Northern Mariana Islands, local, tribal, interstate, and intrastate government agencies and instrumentalities, and nonprofit organizations that aren't ones that lobby. So the ones that lobby are not included, as well as individuals and for-profit organizations. Those are not eligible.
Great, thanks, Chris. So someone from Michigan Tech asked a question. They said that they have a student-built pilot-scale anaerobic digester to process campus food waste, and they would like to partner with another organization as a subcontractor. Are they eligible to do that?
Yes, nonprofit groups are eligible to apply and can request funds and hire a subcontractor to complete an eligible project. So yes, they would be eligible, and the fact that they're thinking about partners is a really good sign, so they can leverage those resources.
Great, thanks, Chris. We had a question about why is the anaerobic digestion the only technology being considered at this time for funding versus using dehydration or other solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. While technologies like dehydration may be important to support SMM and reduce wasted food from going to the landfill, this specific funding opportunity looks at anaerobic digestion. That's the technology that Congress authorized us to support with these funds. And you can find that information on the congressional mandate in section 1, part A, background. That's on page 2 of the RFA.
Great, thank you, Chris. And a related question is, so this person asks about can a entity submit more than one proposal?
Yes, entities can submit more than one proposal. I believe that is in the beginning of the RFA. The section isn't coming to mind right now, but yes, they can submit more than one.
Great, and I think in section 1B in the scope of work, it says that applicants can apply for federal funding and submit more than one application, but they may not exceed $300,000 in their request for each award.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for finding that.
Great, so someone asked about a type of project. They wanted to know if an economic feasibility study for a local government to do AD would be an eligible funding opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. Economic, I believe that is under our list in scope of work. Should be in section 1, part B, scope of work. Yeah, I would definitely take a look at that section starting on page 3 of the RFA. We list a lot of examples of different projects that would be covered under this RFA. And that list isn't exclusive, so there may be other projects that are also covered as long as you achieve one or more of the following objectives that are on that page.
Great, and I think, let me just check and see if we got any more questions. So let me pause for a moment to see if anything has come in. There's a lot of questions here that are. Well, another question is, will food waste diversion data or other project outputs be provided to the public at the end of this project?
I do not know the answer to that question. I will have to find that out. We can get back to you. You know, if it's considered CBI or confidential information or something that the organization doesn't want to, I don't think it would be, but I would have to get confirmation on that.
Okay, and can you also, someone asked, Chris, where are all of these forms and templates located? Can you repeat that, please?
Yes, absolutely. So you can find all of the forms to apply on grants.gov. It should be in the RFA, link to that. And you can go on grants.gov and you create a profile and you fill those forms out there. For the appendices, like the template to the narrative proposal, and that's Appendix A, that's at the bottom of the RFA. Appendix B, that's at the bottom of the RFA as well. That's the example budget table and narrative. And Appendix C, the example of milestones. We didn't really cover that a lot during this presentation, but you can definitely use that to show how the project will be managed and the timeline and specific milestones that you'll have in the project.
Thanks, Chris. Let me take a look here.
I think we probably have time for one more question, just because we want to give folks some time to complete the survey at the end.
Great. The question is, how should we demonstrate the leveraging of costs? Do we do this by submitting supporting letters?
I would demonstrate that leveraging. You can do that by supporting letters. I would also make sure that information is clear in the criterion for the narrative proposal. You can do that through different letters of support, through previous experience in working with groups, or certain commitments that you're currently making about a proposed project. Great. So thank you all so much for your questions. We have some I'm seeing that we're just not able to get to because of time, but we will take those questions and work on getting a response, and we'll be posting that to the EPA website and our webpage where you can find the grant, so you can find answers to those questions so that everyone has them, not just folks who are able to attend this webinar, but folks interested in applying. So now I'm going to turn it back to Christina.
Thank you so much, Chris and Maya. Thanks for your insights today and for providing so much information and fielding those questions. Mostly also, we want to thank all of you in the audience for joining us on this SMM Web Academy. And we hope you continue to join us at future SMM Web Academies, which we hold almost once a month. It is you that this program is designed for. So we're going to end just in a few seconds so that you can take a short evaluation that pops up and gives us feedback on how we can meet your needs. It's critical for us to get this information so that we can serve you better. I wanted to let you know that we will post the webinar audio in about 2 weeks, and the slides will be posted next week. just go back to the EPA's SMM Web Academy page and you will find them there. And please join us again on June 10th from 1 to 2:30 Eastern Daylight Savings Time for the SMM Web Academy webinar, Procurement of Recycled Content Products, Stimulating Recycling Markets and Creating Demand. This concludes today's EPA SMM Web Academy session. Thank you again and have an absolutely fantastic day.